Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. Let's begin today's show with the 8th meeting of the leaders from China, Japan, and South Korea. They have been engaged in regional cooperation for 20 years. On Tuesday, leaders gathered in China's southwestern city of Chengdu, discussing future partnerships and working on common interests. Let's see where they are going to reach this time.
This year marks the 20th anniversary of cooperation among China, Japan, and South Korea. Leaders from the three countries met in Chengdu. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe all highlighted closer regional economic cooperation. Premier Li called for better negotiations towards a free trade agreement among the three and pushed for the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP.
Regarding the ASEAN Plus 3 summit, we've all made our promises to accelerate the establishment of the free trade zone. This action is not only meaningful for the integration and collaboration of our economies, but it also contributes to world peace.
The leaders pledged to work together to oppose trade protectionism and unilateralism and contribute to an open, inclusive world economy. They said efforts would also be made to promote regional connectivity, creating solutions for an aging society, and developing digital technologies.
We have reaffirmed the importance of this trilateral meeting, and we have decided to further promote our collaboration. We have concluded the agreement so as to promote future collaboration, and for those areas closely connected to people's daily lives, we will work together in a closer partnership.
I want to build a new era of the three kingdoms in which we can cooperate and develop together with the international community.
Besides economic cooperation, political trust and security ties are important in maintaining stable relations among the three. Beijing, Tokyo, and Seoul also seek to strengthen cooperation to cope with security risks on the Korean peninsula.
So what's the likely outcome of the trilateral meeting between China, Japan, and South Korea? Let's turn to our panelists. In Tokyo, we invited Katsuhisa Furukawa, a Japanese expert on national security affairs and a former expert on the UN DPRK panel. In Boston, we are joined by Sun-Yong Lee, a Kim-Koo Korea Foundation professor of the Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of Tufts University. And in Beijing, we are joined by Rong Ying, vice president from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Merry Christmas, shall I say, to the three of you, first of all. And now let's go into our discussion about the three countries. First of all, will there be more common ground on geopolitics or more on trade and economics? Mr. Furukawa, would you like to go first, briefly?
Yeah, it is always good to have the meetings among the leaders of the three countries. The most important aspect of this meeting is to establish the personal relationship and trust among the three leaders. We shouldn't have a big expectation coming out of just single meeting. It's the importance of the meeting is that this is a start of the continuation of the coming series of meetings among the three leaders. So far, this time, the three countries agreed on many things, particularly on economy and social matters. It's a common agenda for all Asian countries. Simultaneously, we should also keep in mind about the difference between the three countries, particularly in the realm of security issues and human rights issues.
Professor Lee, go to you as well. Among all of the things being discussed or being touched on by Mr. Furukawa, what do you think will be the biggest common ground? Obviously, trade could be one on top of the agenda, but how far can the three really reach? That is the question, isn't it, Professor Lee?
That's right. You know, regional integration among these countries in Northeast Asia has a very thin, patchy record compared with the long history of close cooperation and integration we see in Southeast Asia. So even the mere fact that the leaders of these three nations have gathered together and have pledged to continue these occasional meetings, I guess that has an ameliorating influence on the deep conflict, divide, due to the cloud of history that Japan casts vis-a-vis South Korea, North Korea, and China. So it's a good event in that the past year over the past year, we've seen a nadir almost, the lowest point of bilateral relationship between South Korea and Japan. So it's a good event, yes. It papers over some of the harsh tone and rhetoric that we've seen since August. President Moon saying back in August that we shall never again lose to Japan, and so on. So yes, it's a positive development, but of course we have to wait and see to see if we reach any kind of real resolution on these historical issues like forced labor.
Well, there are so many things to touch on. I'm not sure whether history will be really on the central agenda this time, but Mr. Rong, RCEP is, if you listen to the speeches by the three leaders coming from the three countries, everyone touches on RCEP. They all encourage the process to speed up, and the question is when. Mr. Rong, we have seen early rounds of discussions, latest over the past few months, but not yet reaching any agreement. People talking about next year, hopefully, and there's a big hopefully. Mr. Rong.
Well, indeed, I think the pledge and the commitment by the three leaders to accelerate the process of conclusion of RCEP, and also based on the conclusion of RCEP to accelerate the negotiations of the free trade agreement of the three countries, I think is very much positive note, even though it's been repeated many times, time and time. I would like to go back very briefly about the sort of impression or the primary takeaways of this leaders meeting. I think, yes, to some extent, I can understand the cautions of our previous, two speakers. But in the meantime, I would like to put in a bigger context. That is the past 2 decades. This is the beginning of the 3rd decade, and I see that over the past 2 decades, this mechanism, this cooperation, driven by crisis as being oriented, and with practical cooperation as a priority, but always disturbed by political differences and others. I would see, I would be a little bit optimistic that maybe looking ahead for the next decade, 10 years, we would may going to see something different.
Why?
That instead of the
Why?
difference dividing us.
Why?
Well, the answer lies in, of course, certainly these pledges, these commitment, but more importantly, I think the changes or the transformation that taken place at the border context, as the major country, major power rivalries are growing. As border, also I think the uncertainties and unpredictabilities of the transformation of by the technology, and a lot of, I think, issues, a lot of challenges would call upon more and coordinated, concerted efforts by the three countries. And also, I think that the very fact that particularly economically, I think they are so much interdependent. So I think we may have we are at the verge at the time that the next decade may be different from.
Well, of course, we always want to think hopefully, but some of the things that you mentioned earlier, Mr. Rong, was also the reasoning that mentioned many times among the three countries. That's why the mechanism exists from the very beginning. So it still takes wisdom and strategies, as the three leaders also touched on in their various speeches this time, as they were having this meeting in Chengdu Sichuan province, where, you know, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is a very ancient classic novel coming from China, was well known in Northeast Asia. Of course, it's not about the three countries, because it was rather a period of time in China among the three small kingdoms within Chinese border, and this time we're talking about three different nations at a modern time. But still, people see wisdom and strategy certainly is the key here. Talking about wisdom, Mr. Sun, how much do you think needs to be added there in order to have at least some of the trade agreements, as mentioned by Mr. Rong? Will trade integration at a time when particularly technology is already bringing us to the next round of a global supply chain, particularly in Northeast Asia, different from the mass manufacturing that was existing between the three nations. Now it's another level. How much wisdom is there needed? Do we have them, Professor Sun? Professor Li, rather.
Well, as your guest in the studio has mentioned, you know, trade relations and interdependence, this is a very positive glue among the three nations, and all of the nations, all three, are to each other and among themselves one of the biggest trading partners. South Korea's trade with China is bigger than South Korea's trade with the US and Japan put together, almost twice, 1.7 times or so bigger. And South Korea enjoys a big trade surplus with China, which is unusual because most of the big trading partners of China enjoy a trade deficit. So trade is certainly a cohesive glue, and this kind of interdependence and cooperation, this trend, this pattern is irreversible in my view. So that's a positive fact. At the same time, as we know, the security structure in Northeast Asia is one led by the United States with Japan and South Korea on one side, vis-a-vis China and other countries. So that reality will always sort of stand in the way of great advances in trade relations, political relations, historical relations, and that structural reality, of course, impedes progress on even North Korea's denuclearization.
Mr. Furukawa, there has always been, to various degrees, a apparent conflict. On one hand, the geopolitical and the so-called security system, as Mr. Lee mentioned, is more U.S.-oriented for South Korea and Japan. However, when it comes to trade, economic integration in the region, it's very much China-related. How now, particularly at a time when you see so many very different ideas as to what the world should be like now, even between Japan and the United States, South Korea and United States today, would that mean for the two countries, at least for Japan this time, Mr. Furukawa, on trade, for example?
Yeah, you know, between Japan and China, and also between Japan and South Korea, we have so many different geopolitical interests which are conflicting with each other. But the reality that we are not able to move to any other place, we will continue to be a neighbor with each other forever. So we have to find a way to cooperate and live together. And in the realm of national security affairs or multi-related issues, Japan, China particularly have a conflicting interest, and it is difficult to reach any meaningful agreement between two countries on security-related issues as of now. But that should not preclude our efforts to seek for cooperation and agreement on economic issues or social issues.
One
both
of the
Japan
issues,
and China is experiencing.
Yeah, Mr. Furukawa, if I could be a little bit more specific, we don't want to be talk about just abstract philosophically, because everybody knows that logic already over the past 20 years. So what's now, one of the things is whether China and Japan will have a free trade agreement. Now, earlier the two countries have free, rather investment agreement, bilateral, and people are looking at the two countries and see, whether there's a free trade agreement, because China has that with South Korea, and Japan has that with South Korea, but not between China and Japan. So maybe there's something, a tool that both countries can grasp on if they really want to. So I think that probably is the question. The logic is so much known, but the thing is, if we want to do things, what are the things, and why are we still from the end result of the things? Can we work on the whys, Mr. Furukawa?
Well, as you have just seen, the three leaders agreed to accelerate the process to conclude a free trade agreement between the three countries. There still remains pending issues, particularly the protection of intellectual property rights in China is different. The system is different widely from the one instituted in Japan. This kind of detailed matters, detailed issues have to be resolved so that Japanese companies can safely feel safe in investing more deeply into Chinese industry, particularly in the cyber-related industry or AI-related industry.
Interesting. Mr. Rong, let me go to you just on the point that Mr. Furukawa mentioned. Whether it is IPR or other issues, we have seen the Japanese companies, rather, investing intensely in China rather than less. And the question really is now, if I could be a little bit bold in saying this, not whether much about learning of the technologies, but also sharing of the technologies. 5G, for example, is an area where Northeast Asian countries are spearing ahead in front of the world. South Korea, China particularly this time. In terms of IPR, in that area, 40% of the global IPR of 5G are coming from this region. So it's really amazing when it comes to real numbers and real case studies. So Mr. Rong, so what's the next stage, when we think about the cooperation? How should we think about the real cooperation rather than just abstractly, and also think about cooperation only from the geopolitical starting point, Mr. Rong?
Yes, that's exactly, I think, the point I would like to make. If we look at the future and the prospects of trilateral cooperation, I think instead, certainly, I think there are issues. The issues will remain, and we might have to live with them. But the important thing is that we have to look ahead for the new issues that would unite us. I think some of the issues like technological innovation and advancement, and I think even the protection of related to that, of course, the protection of intellectual property right is an issue. But if you look at what China has done in the past few years, there's a great advancement like that. But and particularly when China making, I think, the innovation as national priority. And China and Japan and South Korea, I think, can work together to jointly develop a kind of a new technology that would help the region, and the three countries and the region as a whole. And in that process, I think possibly, the disputes or concerns about that can be properly addressed. To some extent, I can understand our Japanese colleagues' concern about that. But behind that concern, I feel strongly the sense that Japan instead want to hold the lead, to maintain the lead, vis-à-vis China and to some extent South Korea. I don't think it is the right way to do that. The right way is that the three countries working together and to promote and develop a more sort of advanced technology. This is actually, it is also one of the areas that the three countries work together, agree to work there.
Let's also hear from Professor Lee as well, from another perspective. At the business leaders meeting today, also held in Chengdu, coincides with the political leaders meeting. There are various proposals proposed by the three sides, particularly Japanese and South Korean, shall I say, business leaders. They talk about the three countries should really now take a new look at their advantages individually and collectively. Not as before, like 3 decades ago, when they think about mass manufacturing. Now it's about technology. So how can the 3 countries be able to research, develop strategies and technologies together, and also test and apply these technologies to test it in a mass market as big as China or even Northeast Asia, including the 3 countries together? That will be one thing that the 3 countries now should really urgently work on, rather than wait and delayed by all the other discussions. Professor Li, what do you make of this proposal? How fast do you think, with the wisdom of the region, that can be done? Is there something we can learn from these 3 decades ago, when the mass manufacturing labor division was, in a way, divided among the 3 countries? It worked very well, but not now anymore, because the countries are different now.
Well, Ms. Tian, you mentioned the romance of the 3 kingdoms, the first lines of which, as you
I know you love history,
begin
Professor
thus:
Li.
after a period of chaos, there is unity, and after a period of unity, there is chaos. I'm sort of a glass half empty kind of guy, a bit pessimistic. But on this trend of greater economic cooperation and technology cooperation, I'm rather optimistic. It will be a slow process, but we have not addressed the big factor, the country in the region that likes to drive wedges, not only among the US, Japan, and South Korea, but also among China, Japan, and South Korea. And I think after a period of provocation, there is usually a period of placation. North Korea's history is replete with such patterns, and we are on the verge today of a major provocation that will render this kind of thrust trend toward economic cooperation more challenging, because North Korea will create problems not only for South Korea and the United States, but also for China.
I see. Mr. Furukawa, we could mention all of the issues of difficulties among the 3 countries. I guess that's true for any country and any countries. But the thing is, as you said, that the 3 countries are still neighbors, and they will be forever neighbors. So the question really is, can we be able to work on something? One of the things I heard from the business leaders of the 3 countries today is their frustration that politics and geopolitics, as well as some of the political issues you just mentioned, are delaying their cooperation, their urgent cooperation, once and again. And they feel very frustrated about it, because they think there are a lot of things needs to be done. Otherwise, the 3 countries will be left behind by some other parts of the world. Mr. Furukawa, do you think politicians and those who play with geopolitics should also think carefully about that? Because after all, the future is going to be about technology and how technology is being applied in trade as well.
Well, yes, if you look at the future, bright aspect of the future, future could be determined by technology. But in reality, if you look around the world today, people around the world have strong attachment to ethnicity or history or many other issues that are not related to technology. I have to say that the economic relationship among the 3 countries is really important, but not stable. And I suspect that this unstability of the trilateral economic relationship may continue in the future.
Okay.
Details matter when we try to promote economic cooperation. This is not the stage to talk about the macro aspect. We need to talk about how to solve disputes among the companies, or how to tackle the forgery products. These or even the law enforcement mechanism to
all right, we're really running. We're running out of time. But I want to thank the 3 of you for your contribution. There are a lot of things that needs to be done, no doubt about that. There's no way that we can just sit here and talk about it without doing anything. As long as we try, there might be things that we can work it out. I hope with a hopeful note we can run the discussion to an end. Mr. Furukawa, Professor Lee, Ms. Rong, thank you so much for your contribution. Really appreciate it once again.